Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got something absolutely fascinating lined up for you today. We're digging into a massive database of biblical texts to figure out exactly how ancient believers navigated their world, specifically how they relied on the Holy Spirit for guidance. We're going to use these texts as a window into the ancient worldview to see how this divine presence was understood, documented, and ultimately lived out. Okay, let's dive right into this. How did ancient believers actually know what to do? It's the exact same sense of direction that we search for today when we're standing at a crossroads. Whenever humans face a massive life decision, political turmoil, or just a totally uncertain future, we crave a map. But for the folks documented in these texts, the ultimate guide wasn't a piece of parchment. It was an active, moving presence. Today, we're going to decode exactly how they experienced that presence. To make sense of all this, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 quick sections. First, defining the helper. Second, empowering ancient wisdom. Third, the prophetic voice. And finally, the ultimate guide. So kicking things off with section 1, defining the helper and understanding the spirit. When we look at our source texts, we're dealing with a truly vast chunk of time. We're tracing a concept of divine guidance that stretches all the way from the ancient migrations in the book of Exodus during the time of Moses, straight through the Babylonian exile with figures like Daniel, and all the way into the first century Roman era detailed in the Gospels. So this wasn't just some fleeting trend. This was a foundational pillar of their reality for thousands of years. In the text of John 14:26, we get a very specific definition. It reads, "But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all things that I said to you." So the crucial point is that this wasn't just some vague, mystical force floating around. It was portrayed as an active, teaching presence, literally a helper designed to actively assist with memory and understanding in real time. And you can see just how deeply this penetrated their everyday reality when you look at the topical data from our source database. The ancient writers categorized the Spirit's influence in totally multidimensional ways. It wasn't just about big, flashy miracles. It dictated their very sense of adoption, or spiritual belonging, as we see in Romans. The complete lack of it was described as spiritual blindness in Exodus. And it literally formed the basis of their fellowship, or community, in 2 Corinthians. It touched basically every single aspect of the human experience. All right, moving right along to section 2, empowering ancient wisdom and practical empowerment. Consider this passage from Exodus 35:21. "Then everyone came whose heart was stirred, and everyone whose spirit was willing, and they brought the Lord's offering for the work." Now, when you read that out loud, it sounds quite contemplative, right? Almost poetic. But if we break down what's actually happening in the narrative, it is incredibly dynamic. Back in that era, divine guidance didn't just look like a booming voice from the clouds. It often manifested as a sudden, intense burst of motivation. The text tells us the Spirit stirred hearts, which meant it created the practical drive, the sheer physical energy, and the willingness needed to actually accomplish massive community projects, like building the tabernacle. It was guidance through action and sheer motivation. Let's move to and see how this builds into a fascinating contrast across the broader theology. In the Old Testament, the guidance of the Spirit is highly specialized. It's given to specific individuals for very specific, often monumental tasks. But by the time we fast forward to the New Testament, the text shifts. It promises a universal guidance, a constant internal teacher that's available for all believers. To perfectly illustrate that Old Testament specialized guidance, just look at Daniel 4:9. King Nebuchadnezzar says to Daniel, "Because I know that the Spirit of the Holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you, explain to me the visions of my dream." This is a textbook example of the Spirit functioning as a highly specialized giver of wisdom. Think about the practical implications for Daniel here. It was literally life-saving. The text shows the Spirit directly aiding his survival in a pretty hostile foreign court. By interpreting these complex dreams and solving deep mysteries without any anxiety, the Spirit provided Daniel with real light and understanding. Ultimately, this divine guidance equipped a captive exile with unparalleled political leverage within the entire Babylonian Empire. That is huge. That brings us to section 3, the prophetic voice and divine revelation. We see this connection explicitly in the Gospel of Luke. Luke 1:67 says, "Now his father Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied." Across all these source materials, we see this repeating pattern. The arrival of the Holy Spirit is instantly linked with a sudden ability to speak profound divine truths about the future. Now, what's really interesting about this information is how the Gospel of Luke intentionally clusters these prophetic moments right around the birth of Jesus. You've got Zacharias prophesying, you have Elizabeth suddenly understanding the massive significance of Mary's visit, and then Simeon receiving a highly specific timeline for his own life. The text is using the Spirit to validate and announce this pivotal moment in their history. Simeon's story in Luke 2 is just beautifully intimate. It states, "And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ." See, this wasn't some grand, nation-building prophecy. This was an incredibly personal, emotional comfort. It shows a form of divine guidance that cared intimately about an old man's peace of mind before he passed away. And finally, Section 4, the ultimate guide and its enduring role. There's this incredibly powerful quote in Mark 13:11. Jesus is warning his followers about coming persecution, but he tells them, "Do not worry beforehand or premeditate what you will speak, but whatever is given you in that hour, speak that, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit." Can you imagine the incredible reassurance this text must have provided to early believers who were facing literal arrest and trials? And this brilliantly illustrates the psychological and emotional relief this specific promise offered to the early church. It provided absolute relief from the paralyzing anxiety of trying to premeditate a defense. It gave them the courage to speak boldly under intense, life-threatening pressure. They had an absolute, rock-solid trust that the exact right words would simply arrive when they needed them most. To wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this reliance, we actually did a direct search of our source material using the New King James Version. It yielded exactly 110 direct mentions of the Holy Spirit. This absolutely wasn't a fringe idea. It was a constant, repeating drumbeat throughout the texts, proving just how foundational this concept of a divine guide was to their entire worldview. Going back to that defining verse we looked at earlier in John 14:26, the mechanics of this guidance are actually brilliantly simple. It's essentially a two-step process. Step 1, the Spirit teaches you in the present, helping you understand your current reality. Step 2, the Spirit brings past teachings to your remembrance. It beautifully bridges the wisdom of the past with the unique challenges of the present moment. So, looking impartially across all these diverse texts, from the Exodus to Daniel, all the way to the Gospels, one core takeaway really emerges. The ancient believers' worldview was anchored in the unshakable belief that they were never navigating life's challenges alone. Whether they were building a tabernacle, surviving a king's wrath, or facing arrest, the text portrays a people profoundly dependent on a divine, active companionship. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to reflect on. If you had an ultimate guide, a presence bringing exactly what you needed to your remembrance at the exact right time, how would it change the decisions you make today? It's a question that echoes right out of these ancient texts and directly into our modern lives. Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer, and I really hope it sparked some great curiosity for you.